Good morning, everybody, and welcome. As you can hear, unfortunately, I have a little bit of a bad throat. It's getting over a cold. I feel, Baruch Hashem, a lot better, but my voice is still suffering a little bit. My experience of these things is either it'll get a lot better over the next half hour or it'll get a lot worse. But if necessary, we'll have a slightly shorter shir, but hopefully we'll still get our money's worth, as it were. I'd like to just thank our sponsors, 3 sponsors today. First of all, the Shirim through the 2025 academic year are sponsored Ilu Nishmas Brana Bas Brandit and Zelig Ben Kalman. And second of all, 2 very specific sponsorships for today. The Shirim this morning, all the morning Shirim are sponsored by Eli and Adele Friedwald to commemorate the Yortzeit of Adele's father, Rav Avraham Yaakov Ben Yechiel Tzvi. Thank you very much to the Friedwalds. Always good to see you. Thank you for the sponsorship. And also the shir specifically today is sponsored by Phil Savrinsky. We have the family Savrinsky over there. It's good to see you all. Well, not all the grandchildren, but like a good number of you, Be'ezrat Hashem. In loving memory of Phil's wife, Avigal Frieda Bas Mordechai, Arlene Savrinsky, who is the Yortzeit is January the 8th Tevet. And I was thinking of canceling today because of my throat, but I thought, something, there's all these sponsorships, it would be a big chaval to cancel. And I think we'll make it through. So it should be an aliyah for all the neshamas that we've mentioned, Be'ezrat Hashem. Okay, now there might be a slight overlap here with Rabbi Adler, but I don't think much because I'd like to take a few different angles on this. As I'm sure you're all aware, yes, another reminder, please, from Miriam to please turn your phones off. As I'm sure you're all aware, that we're coming up to Asara B'Tevet, or should I actually say more specifically, the fast of Tevet, because the fast of Tevet is not, as we'll see, necessarily Asara B'Tevet. Our minhag is to fast on Asara B'Tevet, but really the idea is that there's a fast in Av, there's a fast in Tammuz, there's a fast in Tevet, and there's a fast in Tishrei, and the actual dates may vary. But let's just remind ourselves exactly of what is going on here. So I brought you some dates at the very beginning when Nebuchadnezzar assumed the throne of Bavel, conquered Judea, exiled Yechoniah HaMelech, as we read in the Megillat Esther, the beginning of the Megillah, together with the leading scholars, including Mordechai and Yechezkel. That was also in Tevet, on the first of Tevet, that exile, which now, of course, is Hanukkah. So what was originally a day of mourning on the first of Tevet, because of that exile, has now been overcome by Hanukkah. But for our purposes, the most important is Nebuchadnezzar lays siege to Jerusalem on the 10th of Tevet, and eventually breaches the walls on the 9th of Tammuz. Now, the walls of the second Beis HaMikdash were breached by the Romans on the 17th of Tammuz. So the question is, well, why do we fast on the 17th and not the 9th? Is it just because it was more recent? And in our memory, it was still 2,000 years ago. But we'll see exactly as we come later on that the date is not necessarily the key thing. So let's remind ourselves of some of the key sources now. Number 1, Zechariah. Again, the months are key. The key is, the only way to get these fasts of these different months to be feasts, to be days of Sason v'Simcha, is by ha'emet v'hashalom ehavu. It's only if we fix the problems of bein adam l'chavero, of fairness, of justice, and of shalom, of peace. And of course, there's the famous question which was raised to Zechariah Hanavi. When the people, he actually records that when the people said, "Look, we've come back already from Bavel now. We're rebuilding the Beis HaMikdash. Do we still need to keep these fasts? Do we still need to have these fasts? Aren't we part of the solution now?" And Zechariah tells them, no, what are you talking about? Unless you fix the specific societal problem, then you haven't fixed the issue. If you can tell me that we've restored society to ha'emes v'hashalom ehavu, then you can talk about not having the fast. And in fact, the Gemara in Rosh Hashanah deals with this issue as well. Number 2, kari lahu tzom. Zechariah calls them a fast day. And yet he calls them a sasan v'simcha. How can that be? Amar Rav Papa. Hachika Amar. Bizman sheyesh shalom. If there's shalom in the Jewish people, what's shalom in the Jewish people? So here you'll see the Rashba says, Israel shurim alad matan, that the Jews are securely living in their own land. Securely. Whether you need a temple or not is a good question, but you need the Jews living securely in their own land. Maybe the two things are the same. Yulis Sassan and Simcha. Then the days of Sassan and Simcha. Yesh Shmad, if there's destruction, complete destruction, Tzom, then they're at Tzom. Ein Shmad ve'ein Shalom, if we're living in a kind of limbo, where we can't say we live in a time of Shalom, but we can't say we live in a time of Shmad, the two are too extreme, then Rotzu Mitan and Rotzu Ein Mitan. So we get an option. The fasts become optional fasts. Yihachi Tisha B'Av Nami. Is that true of Tisha B'Av as well, says the Gemara? Amarav Papa, no, Shani Tisha B'Av Hoya V'Huch Balut Boit Saras. Tisha B'Av is quite different because so many bad things happened on Tisha B'Av. It doesn't have the same status of, it could be an obligatory fast or a voluntary fast. Tisha B'Av is always an obligatory fast. And actually the Rambam says, and I'm not got time to go into it today, that even during the second Beis HaMikdash, they still fasted on Tisha B'Av, which actually sounds that way from the Mishnah. It says that they sent out shluchim from the Beis HaMikdash when they were Mekadesh the Chodesh, even for Tisha B'Av, for the fast of Tisha B'Av. So it sounds like they kept Tisha B'Av. But it seems like the other fasts, like Asara B'Tevis, in a time like we live in today, which I think we don't live in a time of Shalom, but we don't live in a time of Shmad. Shmad is too extreme. So it should be optional one way or the other. So if you look in the three in the Maggid Mishnah, so the Rambam who ruled that we have to keep these fasts, the Maggid Mishnah explains, V'achshav nagu hakol k'moshe kasav Rabbi. Now the minhag is that we keep all of these four fasts. V'harehein chova al kol Yisrael ad shibani beis hamikdash. The Maggid Mishnah says, for all intents and purposes, these fasts are compulsory until we get to the Binyan Beis Hamikdash. Okay, fine. In terms of the actual origin of this particular fast, there are two different Nevi'im that we need to look at. One is in Malachim, and one is in Yecheskel. So have a look at number 4, in Malachim. Vahi b'shnat ha'tish'it, in the 9th year, it's good to remind ourselves of exactly how this happened. In the 9th year, Lemalko, of the reign of King Sidkiyahu, Chodesh Asiri, in the month of Tevet, in the 10th month, Be'esel Chodesh, on the 10th of the month, Nebuchadnezzar, Melech Bavel, Hu v'kol chelo al Yerushalayim. Nebuchadnezzar and his army came against Yerushalayim, Vayichan aleha, and he camped against it, Vayivnu aleha dayek, and he built a siege tower, Saviv, around the city. But Tavoh ha'ir b'matzor, the city was under siege, ad hashteyes reshana, for 2 years, until the 11th year of Tzidkiyahu, Melech Tzidkiyahu. Ubetisha lachodesh, and on the 9th of the month, this is the month of Tammuz, the famine was so intense in the town, they didn't have any bread. Eventually the siege succeeded. The walls were breached, and the forces of Tzidkiyahu escaped, ran away through the secret gate, which was in the king's garden. And the Babylonians were surrounding the city, but the Tzidkiyahu escaped down towards the Arava, into the Jordan Valley. So the Persians, the Babylonians, I should say, chased the Melech down into the valley. And they caught up with him in Yericho. And all his forces basically all melted away. And they captured the king, they seized the king, and they brought him up to Nebuchadnezzar in Rivlah, and they put him on trial. And particularly grueling end, Tzidkiyahu's sons were slaughtered in front of his eyes, and then his eyes were gouged out. And they brought him in irons, chained up, if you like, into Bavel. And that's where the 10th of Tevet, if you like, figures. But there's another point here, which I think is the key issue as to why we have this unusual situation, that the 10th of Tevet has a stricture that no other fast has, which is certainly no other rabbinic fast, which is we fast even on Shabbos. This year, Asara B'Tevis falls on a Friday, and we will be fasting into Shabbos. Now, this happens every few years. It happens every 7 or 8 years that this falls on a Friday. When was the last time this happened? Last year. It's extremely unusual that a Asara B'Tevis falls on a Friday 2 years in a row. It last happened back in the 1970s when Nixon was in office. It'll next happen in the 2070s when who knows whether it'll even be in office. Trump, yeah, you reckon? It'll be 115. So it hasn't happened for quite some time. But the reason this happens, meaning every other fast which could potentially fall on a Friday or a Shabbos, it's always pushed off to Sunday. So you look what it's saying, number 5. At the same time as we read these psukim in Malachim that we've just read, that Nebuchadnezzar besieged the town, Yerushalayim, on the 10th of Tevet, look at number 5. Vahid var Hashem Elai, Chezkel says, and God's word came to me, V'shana Tishit, on this 9th year of Tzidkiyahu's reign, the same time, B'chodesh Asiri B'Eser B'chodesh, on the 10th of the month of Tevet. Lay more, and he said the following: Ben Adam, K'tav lecha et Shem Hayom, write down, make a note of this very day, et Etzem Hayom Hazeh, this very day, Samach Melech Bavel El Yerushalayim, the king of Bavel has approached Yerushalayim, and again he repeats, Be'etzem Hayom Hazeh, Be'etzem Hayom Hazeh, Be'etzem Hayom Hazeh. And the Radak explains how this works. If you look here in number 6, V'hi dvar Hashem elai b'shnata tishid l'malchut Tzidkiyahu, ben adam k'sav lacha et Shem Hayom et etzem Hayom Hazeh. Hanevuah ba'alo ba'asara b'tevet. He gets this nevuah. He's in Bavel already. He was taken away to Bavel with Yechonia Melech. He gets this nevuah on the 10th of Tevet, Sheba'oisa Yom Samach Melech Bavel al Yerushalayim, the same day that the Melech Bavel attacks Yerushalayim, besieges Yerushalayim. Va'amalo, and he tells him, She'ichtov oto hayom, write this down, v'yiru lebnei hagola, and show it to all the people in exile. Ki ba'oisa hayom Samach Melech Bavel. Yishmau achakein, and when they later find mipia magidim, and the couriers come from Yerushalayim, ki chein haya ba'oto hayom, that's indeed the day that it happened. Atzmo hayom atzmo shekatov hanavi. This will give a stempel, a hersha, to Yechezkel's nevuah, that he wrote this down at the other side of Asia, as it were, over in Bavel, the exact day when this happened. And he won't listen anymore to Nevi'ei Sheker. And this the importance of this day, that it was recorded, if you like, in 2 different places in the same way on the same day. That's why it has this special status. If you look in the Bet Yosef, number 7, the Bet Yosef says an interesting thing. He says, Gama Rambam katav echad me'arba tzoymes shechaliyos b'Shabbos darchinos la'achar Shabbos. The Rambam says, no, we push off any fast that comes on Shabbos. We push it off to Sunday. Rav David Abu Dram, the Abu Dharam says, because of the Hilchas Tanid, she'asara b'tevis hu mishunim mishar tanis. Asara b'tevis is different from every other tanis. She'im hayachal b'Shabbos, even if it fell on Shabbos, which, by the way, it can't fall on Shabbos in our fixed calendar, but it can fall on Friday. You don't push it off. You don't push it off. Because it says on it, like Yom Kippur. It doesn't come on Shabbat, but even if it did, you would fast on Shabbos, like Yom Kippur. Because of Odah, and he writes also, it does sometimes fall on Friday. We fast on Friday. And other fasts never fall on a Friday. What is the unique power here, which is very interesting? The idea is that the 10th of Teves has a special status, almost like that of Tisha B'Av itself. The Jewish people were meant to be exiled on the 10th of Teves. But in fact, there was a special chesed given. There was a chance. They were given an extra chance. Look here at the source in number 8. Look in the Midrash in number 8. See how it works. Tova Gedola Asai Am Yisrael. Im Yisrael, sorry. A great good was done together with the Jewish people, to the Jewish people by God. Kate said, how does that work? On the 10th of Teves, they were meant to be exiled from Yerushalayim. It has a special status. What did God do? He said, if they have to go out now in January, but they'll die from the cold. Masa, what did he do? Himtenahem behiglotam bakaitz. It was a taiva that God did to us, that He took us out in the summer, so we could walk out of the city in the summer. We didn't have to walk out of the city in the middle of the winter. But actually, the Bavel Rebbe says an interesting thing, that it says samach, the Nebuchadnezzar came close, but somech is also, it says the idea that he only came close. He was lismoch is also to support as well, and therefore he says smach, the idea that the siege of Jerusalem had the potential to actually be its saving, but if the people had only done tshuva, but they didn't, and they had this kind of in between period from the 10th of Tevet for 2 more years. Okay, fine. Let's just pop over the page. My voice is not getting much better, but we'll see. We'll try and keep it going. Now I can't suck and speak at the same time. No, it could end in a very. Have I tried? It might be my last share. Oh, there is. I thank you. Should I try? I don't know how this is going to work. You might need a doctor in the house. Actually, this is something I'm going to have this afterwards. I don't trust myself. Thank you for the. What's that? I've got 2 cups of hot water here. I'm drinking. I've got lots of people looking after me. My mother will be very pleased. Okay. The idea of the 10th of Tevet being almost like Tisha B'Av itself, a day, and some Tzorah HaKohen says it's the day on which Mashiach could have been born, just like Tisha B'Av itself. That's why it has this special status, Be'etzem HaYom Hazeh. The idea of turning these fast days into a sason v'simcha is, as I said at the beginning, dependent entirely on the idea of the ha'emes v'hashalom ehalu. Have a look at number 12, and we'll see what we need to do, what maybe our task is in order to achieve this. Look at number 12. Amalei HaKadosh Baruch Hu leGavriel. This was again famous from Yechezkel, from chapter 9 of Yechezkel. Hashem says to Gavriel the Malach, put a tav on the foreheads of the tzaddikim, shel dio, of ink, because God is going to let loose the forces of destruction in the Churban, and Gavriel has to put a tav. Now, what is a tav? A tav is a marker, but actually in Ktav Ivri, in the original script, not the script we use today, a tav is like an X. That's how it looks. It doesn't look like a tav now. So an X marks the spot. Put them on the forehead. And put a red mark on the foreheads of the Rishaim. So that the forces of destruction, the Malachim of destruction, will know who they are and will destroy them. So it's a very interesting source here. So the forces of accusation went to Hashem, and they said to Hashem, why are you saving this group and you're not saving that group? What's the difference? So Amalai Kadosh Baruch Hu, what are you talking about? Halalu tzadikim gemurim, halalu rishaim gemurim. The people with the black marker, the tzadikim gemurim, they don't deserve to die, and the other guys are rishaim gemurim. So Amrullah, so the accusing angel says, Hayu b'yadam limchos v'loy michu. Yeah, but these tzadikim gemurim could have done something about it. They could have done outreach. They could have made an effort. They could have tried to influence the other people, and they didn't try. So Amalei, so God says to him, Galui v'yadu lefanai she'im michu bahem lo yahayu makablim bahem. And God says, yeah, but I know that even if they tried, it wouldn't have helped. And then the last line, the word goes to the category of Amru lefanav. So he said, the accusing angel said, Ribbon Shalom, im galu v'yadu lefanecha. Even if you know, lifnehem mi galu. They didn't know. They didn't have an excuse. They didn't get involved in outreach and social justice in trying to influence others. They ignored them. They just got separated from the Rishaim. And they should have tried. They could have tried. This idea of arvus, of kol Yisrael arevim zeh lazeh, and Kol Yisrael Arevim Zeh Bazeh. There's maybe a slight difference between these two ideas. The idea that the tzibur, the famous acronym of the tzibur being Tzadi Bet Vav Reish Tzadikim Beinonim Urushaim, they have to be together. And in fact, in number 13, the Midrash says, Leik Knesset Kol Yudim. When Esther says to Mordechai, you have to gather together all the Jews, and in time Bashusha. But Sumo Alai, you see from here, the most important thing about a fast day is the Jews coming together. That's the key. That's what we should be doing on a fast day. Make a fast, says in Yoel, Kiru Atzara, call a stop to everything. Isfu Zakanim, gather everything together. And that's why the Rav Soloveitchik actually said the word som is connected with the word somet. The word somet is a junction. Why is the word somet a junction? Because the word samot, is a braid, where two things become entwined one with the other. That's why we call it somet because it's all these sort of spaghetti of roads coming all together. So Rav Soloveitchik said the same thing applies for the tzom. The purpose of the tzom is to bring everybody together, to connect everybody, to knit everybody together. And therefore, whatever we can do on the tzom to be ma'acheh the Jewish people is definitely the mitzvah of the day. Okay, so I can a little bit on the Sarah B'Teves, but actually there are two other fasts, like I mentioned last week, which I want to dwell on a little bit more today as well. So have a look with me about the 8th of Teves. Last week we spoke about the 9th of Teves. But let's talk about the 8th of Teves. And this I think you'll find is very interesting. So I read for you last week that there is this list of what's called Ta'aniyot Tzadikim, the extra fasts that certain Tzadikim used to keep. And it wasn't just the 10th of Teves, it was the 8th and the 9th and the 10th. So if you look at number 15, Kasav Bahag, so the Bahag writes, Elu Yamim Shematanim Bahem. These are the days that you have to fast. B'chet B'Tevet Hayumas Et Talmai HaMelech. On the 8th is the story of Ptolemy the king. What was the story of Ptolemy the king? So the Shulchan Aruch records it in number 16. Shmona B'Teves, on the 8th of Teves, Nichtav HaTorah Yavanis. The Torah was translated into Greek. B'Yemei Talmai HaMelech. V'haya Choshech Ba'olam Shlosha Yomim. There was darkness on the world for 3 days. We talked a little bit about that in the previous shiurim. Also, there's a hint there to the idea of a 3-day fast as the 8th, the 9th, and the 10th, but also darkness comes in 3-day units, as we see in Shemot. So this story of the Torah being translated into Greek is actually is much broader than I think people realize. We see it appears in the Gemara. It appears in the Gemara in Megillah. We see it in the Gemara in Maseches Sofrim in number 17. Maseches Sofrim is probably a slightly later source than the Gemara in Megillah. But we originally also see it in two much earlier sources. Philo, who was a Hellenized, Greek sort of influenced Jew, a religiously observant Jew, living in Alexandria in the 1st century CE, he also writes the story of the translation of the Torah into Greek. This is hundreds and hundreds of years before the Gemara records it. And he includes the ideas that we're going to see in a minute, that they put people in different rooms and they all came to the same answers. But he paints it as a very positive outcome. He says because the Greeks really admired the laws of the Jews, they forget Philo. A lot more learning has gone into Philo recently. I don't know if you've ever studied any Philo. It's got a very interesting, very different take on Chumash, etc. But Philo understood that the mitzvot were universal, and that if non-Jews understood the mitzvot, they will be a universal law for all mankind. They're all rational, and you can understand what they are. And therefore, the idea of translating the Torah into Greek for Philo was a great simcha, and he talks about it being a great occasion. Not like the Gemara in a minute, which we'll see. It gives it a very negative spin, or at least one part of it. He even says, and I brought you in the appendix, you don't need to look at it for now. I brought you a long excerpt from Philo of Alexandria. He says every year on the island of Pharos, which don't forget, back in those days, there was I think the lighthouse was on Pharos, right? The 7 wonders of the world. There was the Library of Alexandria, which was one of the wonders of the world, and the lighthouse on Pharos. It says every year, he said, on Pharos, there was a national camping holiday where people would go and have picnics to celebrate the translation of the Torah into Greek all those years before. Jews would go, non-Jews would go. He said it was a very exciting holiday that he had. But I even brought you an earlier source still than that. that this story of the translation of the Torah into Greek is actually recorded in the second century, late 3rd, early 2nd century BCE, in something called the Letter of Aristeas, which I brought you at the back as well. Aristeas, sorry, I got the first time. The Letter of Aristeas to Philocrates, you can see that in there as well. You can read that, how they translated it, etc. But they have a different spin on it as than the Gemara we're going to see in number 17. Have a look in number 17. Maaseh b'chamisha zakenim. There's a story of 5 elders, shekasvu l'tamei hamelech et haTorah Yavanis, that they translated the Torah into Greek for Talmei HaMelech. V'haya oisa hayom kasher Yisrael k'yom shenaseh ba'egel. And that day was difficult for the Jewish people, like the day that they created the Egel. Shaloi haita haTorah yichola litargem kol tzarka. This is the key here, because you can't translate the Torah properly. Lo haita haTorah yichola litargem kol tzarka. Why? Why can't you translate the Torah? On the contrary, a Torah written in Greek is a kosher Sefer Torah. We talked about this a couple of weeks ago. If it's the whole Torah written in ancient Greek, it's kosher as a scroll. So why can't you translate the Torah into Greek? What's not possible? Seems to have been an impossible task, and it shouldn't have been done. But then, and people don't realize this, Shuv Ma'asa b'Talmei HaMelech. There's a second story of Talmei HaMelech, not the first one. They brought in these 72 elders. And they put them in 72 different rooms. And he didn't tell them what he brought them in for. Okay. And then he went into each room afterwards and told them, this is what you're here to do. Write down the Torah of your master into Greek. And each one of them had Ruach HaKodesh. It's very interesting. This account is not described in negative terms in the same way as the first one. Each of them had Ruach HaKodesh. And they all made the same alterations. Okay, and each one wrote a Sefer Torah. And there were 13 specific things that they changed. And if you're interested in looking at the 13, I'm not going to do them now, but I wrote down in number 6 all 13 changes that they made, and you can see for yourself. All changes that they made so that people wouldn't be mistaken and understand certain psukim in a way which could have been heretical. Now, what's interesting as far as I'm concerned is the Septuagint, which is the Greek translation of the Torah, does not have these 13 changes in it, which is very interesting. So when we talk about the Targum Shivim, the translation of the Torah into Greek, there was clearly more than one translation going on. Even in this source in number 17, we've seen 2 different stories of translation. One was with 5 elders, one was with 72 elders. And the Septuagint, which we later see as the Greek translation of the Torah that everybody was using, there's a debate as to whether Philo was even had access to Hebrew. Maybe he only learned the Torah in Greek and commented on the Torah in Greek. But it seems to be a slightly different translation. And also, it was only the Chumash; it wasn't the whole thing. So you can look into that in your own time as to exactly what translations were which and how that works. But the idea of translating the Torah as being such a negative thing requires a little bit of thought on our part. Because if you look back, and Rabbi Yonason Eibeshitz makes this point, if you look in number 18, originally when Moshe Rabbeinu wrote down the Torah, it says, "V'katavta ala avanim," you write it down on the stones. They wrote these stones like the sort of Rosetta Stone at the beginning when they went into the land of Israel. They put these stones up. At Kol Divrei HaTorah Hazot, you write down all the words of the Torah. Be'er Hativ. What does it mean, Be'er Hativ? Rashi says, Be'er Hativ, B'shivim Lashon, in 70 different languages. So the Torah from the very beginning was meant to be translated. It was translated into these 70 languages, or at least Chazal understood that this would be a positive thing to do, to translate the Torah into 70 different languages. So why are we so upset about the Torah being translated into Greek? So it's interesting, some of the Meforshim say that it wasn't in itself a bad thing. It was the potential to be a bad thing. This is also the Lubavitcher Rebbe says this. It was like the day that they made the Egel, not the day that they worshipped the Egel. He says the day that they made the Egel, nothing had happened yet. They just made it. It was the next day, Machar, like Aaron says, we're going to worship the Egel. So just translating the Torah into Greek in and of itself is not necessarily a problem. The question is, what are people going to do with it. And one of the main problems, and this is true of anyone who's ever done any in-depth skills learning, when somebody translates the words of the Pesukim for you, they take away all the contours of the text, all the things that you would like. Oh, why is it written in this way? Why is it written in this way? Intertextual ideas between one area of Chumash and another area of Chumash or Nach, whatever. They've all been flattened out because someone's already done the work for you, and in that sense, the translation is misleading. I heard there was an expression in Italian. Now I'm going to get it wrong now. It's something like tradutore, traditore, that all translations are traitors. Okay? And therefore, we have to understand that the translation itself is taking away a very significant part of what was the original koach of the Torah itself. And I brought you on number 19, just go to page 5, a source that I don't often bring, Rav Eliyahu Kitov, in the Sefer TORAH. So he writes a beautiful mashal here, number 19. Mashal lema davedome. What is this like? La'ari shenitzad v'kal'ahu b'sogel, like a lion that you capture from the wild and you put in a zoo. Kodem shenichla, before the lion was captured, hayu hakol yerem b'fanav borchim. Everybody's scared of the lion. Everybody's running from the lion. The achshav, and now hakol ba'im u'meitzitzim ba. Everyone comes and looks at the lion. The lion Nebuch is in a glass cage, and all the kids have put their hands on the cage and bang on the cage to eat the lion. It's a terrible thing. People say, "Va'omrim, heichan kvoros asher zeh." I thought lions were scary. Lions are not scary. Look, he's right here. Kain HaTorah, so too the Kach HaTorah. Kol zman shehi netuna b'yad Yisrael, when it's in the hands of the Jewish people. Umitpareshet al yidei chachama b'loshonah, and the chachamim, the people who interpret the Torah, can come to it and reveal the multi-layered reality of the Torah. Lashon HaKodesh, in original language, Hakol charadim mipneihem mepanea. Everybody is in awe of the Torah. Umityarim lahatil b'doifi, and there's a great nervousness at misinterpreting it because you have to prove it from the text. Va'afilu ben necha, and even a non-Jew, shechash chanavshu b'Torah, who wants to learn Torah, avhu lo haya lo maga ima Torah. They have to come to a yeshiva. They have to learn it there. And they have to speak Hebrew. But once you lock the Torah up, if you like, kalau is a Torah, but you lock it. This beautiful idea of you trap it in a Greek language. You've taken all of the yira out of the Torah. The kala rotzeh. Anyone who wants to, ba'al meitzizbah, can come and peer in an inappropriate way. And anyone who wants to misinterpret the Torah, ba'al pogim, can come and misinterpret the Torah. And I brought you a couple of very important, ideas underneath here, which goes even deeper. According to the Greeks, the truth was in the idea. It was in the form. Okay, the idea is true. The words are just a means of transmitting the idea from my head into your head, which is actually a very clever thing. I can be thinking of a tree right now, and I want you to be thinking of a tree. So I say the word tree, and now magically, this image which is in my mind is magically in your mind. It's an unbelievable thing if you think about it. Just by wobbling my vocal cords and your bones inside your ears, vibrating, I have now transmitted the idea from my mind to your mind. But the truth is the idea. The word tree was just nominal. You could have used anyone. If we all agreed that the word for this thing that we call a tree was a box or a cat or a dog, then we could have used any of those words. It makes no difference which words we use. The key is the idea, and whichever word communicates the idea is the key. Have a look at number 20. Greek philosophy more or less begins with the insight that a word is only a name, i.e. it doesn't represent the true being. The word is only a name. In Hebrew, the word for a word is a davar, which is the thing itself. The word, and this is key for us, the word itself, the text itself has a life of its own. It's not just a means of communicating an idea. Look in Plato, number 21. He who follows names in the search after things and analyzes their meaning is in great danger of being deceived. How real existence is to be discovered is, I suspect, beyond you and me. We must rest content with the admission that the knowledge of things is not to be derived from their names. You don't get any truth from the words itself, says the Greek. So too Aristotle, number 22. Spoken sounds are symbols of affections in the soul, and written marks symbols of spoken sounds. A name is spoken sounds significant by convention. It's convention only. It doesn't matter what it is. And for us, that's very different because the text is the one thing which is alive. For us, the text is the thing itself. And what we're always doing when we're trying to learn text is to analyze what the text says. I think it sounds like an obvious point, but it's really not an obvious point. I'll give you an example from that my students often raise with me. How old was Yitzchak at the Akedah? How old was Yitzchak at the Akedah? 37. You're all very confident about that. Where do we get 37 from? I mean, does he sound 37 from the text? Not really. Okay? And how old was Rivka when she's doing all the water with the camels? 3. Now, this is all part of the same system. The reason he would be 37 and she would be 3 is because you've read Rashi, and Rashi quotes from Seder Olam Rabbah, who says, look, just do the math. Sarah was 90 years old when Yitzchak was born. Sarah died when she was 127. So Sarah died when Yitzchak was 37. Okay, so far it's just straightforward math. Yitzchak got married when he was 40, also in the text, and the birth of Yitzchak is recorded just after the Akedah, okay? And the death of Sarah is recorded at the same time. So the Akedah, the birth of Rivka, and the Akedah all happened, and the Akedah, the birth of Rivka, and the death of Sarah were all basically the same. And therefore, the same time. And therefore, Rivka was 3 with the camels, and Yitzchak was 37 at the Akedah. Now, the Ibn Ezra comes along and says, that doesn't sound like the Pshat. It sounds like Rivka was much older, and it sounds like Yitzchak was much younger. He said he can't have been like 3 or 4 because he's carrying the wood. Okay? So he's probably 9 or 10. It's probably 9 or 10. And Rivka could well be 17, 18, 19, 20, because you're not forced to say that the 3 events that I just mentioned in the text all happened at the same time. You don't have to understand that the Akedah happened, and immediately afterwards Rivka was born, and immediately afterwards Sarah died. We're conditioned to fight. So my students ask me, but I don't understand. How old was Yitzchak at the Akedah? He can't have been 37 and 10. Meaning, if you debate Elu ve'elu divrei Elokim Chaim, and you say in halacha, Beis Hillel think the halacha should be this, and Beis Shammai think the halacha should be this. Okay, I understand why they're both true. Because you can look at the halacha in different ways. You can analyze it this way, you can analyze it that way. But you can't be 2 ages at the same time. Yitzchak cannot have been 11 and 37. So which was he?
What's the nafkamina?
Well, that's a good question. What's the nafkamina? Why do I even care how old Yitzchak was at the age of the Akedah? So there's a Tosfos, I didn't bring it on the sheet, but it's really very germane to this Tosfos read, that says, no, you've misunderstood. When you see the Mefarshim arguing about how old Yitzchak was at the Akedah, they're not arguing about how old Yitzchak was at the Akedah. They're arguing about how to read the text. Because the text is all I really care about. Yitzchak at the Akedah is history. You'll never go back there. You'll never know how old Yitzchak was at the Akedah. Rav Hutner has a whole piece where he says, history is ganuz. It's even if you got in the time machine and you went back to a great historical event and 3 of you stood there and watched it, you still have 3 different views as to what exactly happened here. But we can't even do that. So we can never get access to history. History is dead. What is alive? The text, Torah Chaim. The text is alive. And the nafkamina is this. The story of the Akedah and the story of Rivka are there to teach me on a certain level how to be a better Jew. That's why I'm learning them. I'm not interested in some sort of abstract historical reality. Now, of course, there are real historical things going on in the text. Of course there are. But that's not the purpose of why I'm learning them. I'm learning them to draw a message out of the Akedah. And you get a very different message from the Akedah if Yitzchak is 37 and allowing himself to be tied up than if Yitzchak was 11 years old and being held down by his father, screaming, what's going on, let me go. It's a very, very different message. And therefore, this is why people, I think one of the problems that we have is that, like it or not, we all read the Torah now like Greeks, which is, the words don't really matter. What really matters is what happened, or the idea that he's trying to teach. And that's not true. What really matters is the words, because the words themselves, the text itself, is absolutely key. And this is one of the reasons why the translation of the Torah into Greek was so all-pervasive, because it's made us all think like Greeks. We should be looking at the text as real and the ideas as coming straight out of the text, and not the text just trying to communicate the ideas. In Hebrew, the word chatul and the word kelev could never be interchanged from each other. They have a meaning within themselves. It's not like dog and cat, which we could call a cat a dog and a dog a cat, and who cares? But in Hebrew, you can't do that. The word itself has a reality. And I think there's a lot of depth to that. There's a lot of meaning to that. You need to think about that and how we read the text and what we're reading it for and how we relate to it. Okay, that's just a little thought on the translation of the text into Greek and how we think like Greeks, etc. Let's look at a few other points before we wrap up. So last week we talked a lot about this strange event of Shimon HaKalponi, this Jewish double agent that was in the Vatican. We're not going to talk about that this week. But I also want to mention to you that the 9th of Tevet is recorded as the death of Ezra. And this is one of the things we talk about also in the Piyutim, in the Slichas that we say on the 10th of Tevet, where we talk about Ezra. If you look here at number 24, Bates Bailon Neda, so the Gemara says, or the Torah says, I should say, we don't exactly know what happened on the 10th. On the 9th, rather, the Taz says like this. Tema Gedola, we do know. It's very strange. Ha'itzi b'slichos shel Yud b'Tevis. We see on the slichos of 10th of Tevis, the Betesbai, that on the 9th of Tevis, Meis Ezra HaSofer, that Ezra HaSofer died. So we know we're commemorating the death of Ezra. And Ezra was an incredibly important figure. The Ezra, in many ways, was the one that re-established our Torah. If you look at number 25, Shevet Chila, originally, Israel, when the Torah began, the paradigm of learning Torah broken down, Allah Ezra mi Bavel v'yasta. Ezra re-established the Torah. The old Gemara is that Ezra would have been worthy of receiving the Torah if Moshe hadn't received it before him. So the death of Ezra to us is a little bit like the death of Moshe Rabbeinu. And therefore says Rabbi Bishitz, that's why it's hidden a little bit. We don't know exactly where Moshe Rabbeinu is buried. We don't know where Ezra is buried, etc. We do know the date of Moshe Rabbeinu's death, actually, the Zayin Adar tradition, so it's not exactly the same. But also it's interesting, the Targum Yonasan identifies Ezra as Malachi the prophet. And of course, Malachi was the last of the Nevi'im. So the death of Ezra also becomes for us the end of Nevuah. And therefore that gives it even more importance and relevance and meaning. This is the date on which Nevuah was taken from the Jewish people, which has again shifted the way we connect with God in a very, very significant way. Other things happened in Tevet as well. I brought here the first of Tevet was the exile with King Yechoniah, as we talked about before. The 23rd of Tevet was the day on which the Jews were forcibly converted in Portugal. There's a lot to say about that as well. But I also want to point out an interesting, go over to page 7, on the 5th of Tevet. So what's with the 5th? Look at this source at number 28. Because the Gemara here has a debate. Which day is the fast of Tevet? Which day? Number 28, Tanya, Amarim Shimon, Arba Devarim Haya Rabbi Akiva Dorish. There are 4 things that Rabbi Akiva used to learn. Va'ani Ein Dorish K'mosa, but I don't agree with him. I don't agree with how that works. Here's one of them. Soma Asiri, the fast of the 10th month, Zasara B'Tevis. That is, Rabbi Akiva says, is the 10th of Tevis. Shabo Samach Melech Bavel Yerushalayim. Va'ani, but me, Eini Omekain. I don't agree with that. Ella, Soma Asiri, the fast in Tevet, Zechamisha B'Tevet. It should be the 5th of Tevet. Shabo Ba Shmua Legola, because that's when the Jews in the Galut heard Shehuk Saha'ir. Nothing to do with the siege. They got news on the 5th of Tevet that the city had been destroyed later on. Shina Amar, and he quotes from Yechezkel, Vayihi b'shteas esrei shana b'asiri b'chamisha al chodesh. It was on the 12th year of Tzidkiyahu, on the 10th month, on the 5th of the month. That's when they got news that the wall, that the city had fallen. And therefore the day that they heard the disaster became the day that they commemorated. That's the fast of the 10th month. Not the 10th of Tevet, the 5th of Tevet. And actually the Mishnah says, the Midrash says in number 29, Eretz Yisrael, in Eretz Yisrael the minhag was, Mit'anin al-Maseh, they fasted on the actual action, meaning on the 10th of Teves. Ubagoyla, And in Chutz La'aretz, ala Shmua, they fasted on the 5th of Teves, when they heard that the city had been destroyed. And in the end, it says, Loi nagul Yisrael yitanas ela ba'asara b'Teves. But the minhag became that everybody fasts on the 10th of Teves. So how can there be a debate as to which date in Teves the festival is, the fast is?
Well, was it destroyed on the 10th? Or was it just surrounded on the 10th?
No, it was surrounded on the 10th. It was destroyed later on in Av, but they only got news on the 10th. So which are we going to do? So the Minchas Chinuch has a very interesting idea, which I think is very important. I'm not going to read the whole thing inside. He says that at the end of the day, there's often a debate about which day in these months we have to have the fast. I'll give you an example. When is Tisha B'Av? Sounds like a stupid question, right? When is Tisha B'Av? On the 9th. But then we see Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, I think it is in the Gemara, says, if it was up to me, I would have made it on the 10th. Because the 10th is when everything really burned down. Okay, I mean, is that an option? You can just do it whichever day you like. Here we see which date is Asara B'Teves, the 10th. But according to Rabbi Shimon, the fast of Teves should have been on the 5th. What about Tammuz? So the walls were breached on the 17th of Tammuz, but that's the second Beis HaMikdash. In the first Beis HaMikdash, they were breached on the 9th. So the Minchas Chinuch suggests it doesn't actually matter which day of the month we fix the fast, as long as the fast is in that month. There's a fast in Tevet, there's a fast in Tammuz, there's a fast in Av, and there's a fast in Tishrei. Which day it is flexible, which is very interesting. So if that's true, everyone says, Tisha B'Av is going to be a holiday one day. I don't know. It just means we're going to have a holiday in Tevet, a holiday in Tammuz, a holiday in Av, and a holiday in Tishrei. So maybe it won't be on the exact days. The exact dates don't matter that much. But you see, very interestingly, the flexibility. And I just want to finish. I'm going to finish a few minutes early. And then I'll suck my Ricola sweet. Thank you for that. There was a massive attempt, not massive, there was a significant attempt in the early days of the state to fix Asara B'Teves as the Yom HaKadosh HaKlali. And today still there are people, I think this has caught on a little bit more again recently, but originally in 1949, the Rabbanut decided the 10th of Tevet should be a national memorial day for the Shoah, and a day to say Kaddish for all those people that they didn't know which day they'd actually been killed. And where did they want to make as the Holocaust Memorial Center? Har Zion. There was a big debate in those early days of the state whether they should make it on Har Zion or they should make it on Har Herzl, or Yad Vashem, where Yad Vashem is now, next to Har Herzl. So the attempt to make the 10th of Tevet as the National Holocaust Memorial Day failed. And in fact, the Knesset decided that Yom HaShoah will be the 27th of Nisan, which was very controversial because it's during the month of Nisan, which is not meant to be a month on which you have negative memorial days. Although originally, Yom HaShoah they wanted to make it on Erev Pesach, which was the day that the Warsaw Ghetto was liquidated, on Erev Pesach. And you can imagine what a balagan that would have been. But Har Zion, of course, was the only place that you could see into the old city. In the 1950s, the old city was captured, the Jordanians were in charge, and therefore they felt that would be the place on which to make this Holocaust memorial. And I brought you an early response from that period, which I just wanted to end with, and because we can associate the 10th of Teves also with Yom HaKadosh HaKlali, and it gives you a feel for the kind of questions which were being asked after the war, after the Shoah, when people were so traumatized. Actually, I heard a podcast about post-traumatic growth on the Orthodox conundrum. 90% of people who experience trauma experience post-traumatic growth afterwards, not post-traumatic stress. 10% experience post-traumatic stress. But there was a real concern when the state of Israel was founded that almost everybody living in the state was post-trauma. There were Ashkenazim and some Sfarim that had come out of the Holocaust, and there were hundreds of thousands of Sfarim that had been thrown out of their homes in Iraq, in Egypt, etc., etc. How are you going to end up with a state of Jews without the whole state becoming one big, mental health disaster? Okay, exactly. So look at the kind of questions they were asking. Number 31. But the wonderful thing about today is that we can expect 90% to experience post-traumatic growth, Be'ezrat Hashem. We're just going to get through it. Look at number 31. The Inyan HaChevel Shenitla Bo HaKadoshim. It's a question about a rope which was used to hang victims in the Holocaust. Begola, the Hashatz, the Har Zion, and the Shatz, the Shleich Tzibor on Har Zion on the 10th of Tevet, Mishtamesh bo lehit azer b'tfilah. So it wants to use it as a gartel. They wanted to use a rope as a gartel on that day because the rope was used to hang Jews during the war. So look at what he says, Rav Meshulam Rotz. Al dava hasheila shel va'adat Har Zion. So that the Har Zion committee has raised the question. Binyan ma sheviu haolim, people who'd come up to live in Israel, they brought with them chevel av sheisiru me'al echad ha'itzim, a rope that they pulled off one of the trees, be'ir achad shebamedina Polin, in one of the Polish cities, shenitlu alav me'achenu Beit Yisrael Hashem yakom damam, that many Jews had been hanged on that rope. Umanale ha'avada hanal in Higu, and the Vad had decided that they were going to have a minhag shebizman shemes avsim b'yom asara b'tevis, when they all come together on Asara b'tevis, b'bet knesset shel Har Zion, lehitpalel o lahaskir neshamot harugim hakadoshim Hashem yakom damam, that when they come to remember all of those millions of Jews, many of whom we don't even know when they were killed. As yisazeh hachazan b'chevel zeh. This is on this day the chazan is going to wear this rope as a gartel in order to evoke those memories. V'achshav heim shoelim im ein chashash isabah, and then they ask, is this okay? So is it okay or is it not okay? So look what he says. The fiani as daiti niribaro she'aminag hazet tzrichim levatlo. You have to stop this. This is not okay. The yeshbo issa al pidin, and it's actually osa al pidin to do that. And he says hachevel ha'av shenitlo alav, that this rope which many Jews had been killed on, yesh lo din sudar shenechnak bo. This has the din of a cloth that had been used to strangle somebody. But tzarech kavura, that actually needs to be buried as well. The rope needs to be buried. V'hu aso b'hana, and it's not allowed to be used. Ve'im came, and if that's the case, aso lishtamesh bo shiach goroto achazan al mobashav. The chazan is not allowed to wear it as a gartel. V'hu isil da'oraita, and it is a Torah prohibition, he says. The Elef Mikra, because we learn this from Sukkim, that the rope which was used to hang somebody has to be buried together with that person. The only reason I brought this tshuva is that, like, the strength of feeling I'm on a Sarah B'Tevis. I know that my wife in our community is planning on a Sarah B'Tevis, a whole conference on women saying Kaddish, for example, which is very interesting. The idea that many women want to say Kaddish. We had a whole shir on that, if you remember, about a year or two ago, a whole series of shirim on that. But Asara B'Tevis is in many ways the sort of central date on which we think of that. Excuse me. Okay, well, that was a bit painful, probably more for you than for me. But next week we'll be back to normal service, Be'ezrat Hashem, and thank you again for all your care and attention. Yeshua Koach.